I'm your impromptu host for tonight's debate between Rami and you say Ty or Ty?
Die.
Ty. All right. So yeah, pretty standard format for tonight. I believe we are starting with 10-minute opening statements, then followed by 7-minute rebuttals, 10-minute cross examination, and 5-minute closings, all of which will begin with Ty, since he is the affirmative. And the question for tonight's debate is, let me check, because like I said, this is quite impromptu. Was image veneration as described at Nicaea II part of the pre-Nicene church? So Ty, whenever you're ready, you can begin your 10 minutes. Well, actually, never mind. Let me get a timer ready here before you do that. And when you
So let me
begin speaking, I'll start your time. Hold on, though. Still don't have my timer up.
yeah, just let me know
Yep.
when I can
Yep, I'll
start.
let you know.
Okay.
All right. Um, all right. Whenever you start speaking, I'll begin your time.
All right. Okay. So the topic tonight is about icon veneration. The parameters of the debate was the first 3 centuries, so before 325 AD, before Nicaea. I would like to lay out a couple of points of my arguments. We are here to talk about the theology of the ancient church teaching a dualia latria distinction, and to provide a good case of how these distinctions between what is veneration and what is worship are necessary to reconcile all of the quotes that will be used tonight from church history and scripture. Now, this needs to be pointed out immediately. The early church's liturgical life, theology, and iconography are actually tied together and connected. Iconography was used as a tool to teach for the common laity because they could not read or write. These images in churches were not just there for any reason, for anyone that is familiar with the subject. Now, what does the second commandment actually forbid? God says, "You shall not make yourself a graven image or any likeness that is in the heaven above or in the earth beneath. You shall not bow to them, neither serve them, for the Lord your God is a jealous God." This commandment is not opposed to all images whatsoever. Rather, it is the carving out of them to worship as false gods. That is what makes them graven images, idols. We know this because just a few chapters later, God actually commanded for statues of 2 cherubim to be placed on the Ark of the Covenant, meaning that all images are not necessarily idols, which are false gods. In Joshua 7:6, he prostrated before images on the Ark of the Covenant. Now, people might object and say, but God's presence was attached to the ark, so he worshiped God. But we would say, yes, this is actually correct. This is fine. I would say that the scripture is teaching a type prototype distinction where he honors the ark, which is a type for God and representation of God. And by bowing before it, this passes on to God, who is the original prototype of the ark. Next, in Psalms chapter 99, verse 5, it says, "Exalt the Lord and worship his footstool." In the original Hebrew, the word at is not there. The word for worship here is shakah, the Hebrew equivalent to proskuneo. It is a prostration used to show honor and not worship in 1 Kings chapter 6, verses 23 to 26. It talks about the Temple of Solomon and how there were images everywhere in this temple. Now, this is relevant because in Psalms 5:7, it says, "I will bow down toward your holy temple." This means the prostration towards the temple would also have been directed towards images, supporting iconodulia. Next, in Revelation chapter 3, verse 9, our Lord says to the church in Sardis, "I will make those who say they are Jews but are not come and give you proskuneo," the Greek word, "at your feet." Now, I know my opponent would not want to claim that Jesus was blaspheming here and claiming people to come and worship at others' feet, commanding idolatry. So, for this to not be a contradiction, he would have to concede that the scriptures do teach that there are forms of prostrating to the ground that are not worship and idolatry. I just gave a few examples from the scriptures where prostration was before men, Prostrating was before the Ark of the Covenant, and prostration was towards Solomon's temple, which had images. And God was perfectly okay with this. Now, as my opponent has admitted, and even other top Protestant apologists like Gavin Ortland have in his videos on this topic of icon veneration, they recognize that the earliest days of the church did indeed always have images, given the evidence from archaeology and the early Christian catacombs, with images in the caves, going back to the first and second centuries, even according to a lot of scholarship. So now what they have done was give up their previous position, which was they had no images at all in the early church, to now they did have images since the beginning of the church, but just did not venerate them. I would like to point out in Gavin's own words, he doesn't prefer to be called an iconoclast, but rather an iconomachy, one who struggles about icons. Now, to show a couple of examples in church history, here's pre-Nicene church evidence before 325 AD that they did in fact honor images. Now to kick off with the more explicit evidence. First, in Origen's homily on Joshua chapter 20, he talks about how people bowed their heads before the priests and the altars which had images on them. Next is Saint Procopius, who died in 303 AD. His martyrdom records that there were three images venerated. One was Christ, and the two on the side were Archangel Gabriel and Michael. The next one is Saint Cyrus and John in 304 AD. Sophronius of Jerusalem had recounted that Saint Cyrus and John prostrated before an icon and prayed for a man to be healed in front of this icon. Another one is Saint Hipparchus and Philotheus. They prayed in front of an image of a cross, which was a remembrance to honor Christ just before being martyred by the emperor at the time for refusing to worship other gods. The next one is Methodius of Olympus. In his second discourse on the resurrection, he says, quote, honor every image in the world, and images of God's angels are made to his glory, and honor another one. Another one is in Eusebius' word called the proof of the gospel, a picture of Abraham which was venerated. Another example in Octavius Minucius Felix in chapter 9, Christians at the time were accused of worshiping an image of a cross and an image of a donkey by the Romans. We know, in fact, that these Christians were not actually worshiping these images, but rather honoring them. But Romans accused them of worshiping these things at the time. Now, to move on to the other evidence where they do venerate icons in other forms. One is the Apocryphal Acts of John. It was a Gnostic document which was written against Christian practices at the time about honoring icons. There was an image of a man which was crowned. Next is Ignatius in his epistle to the Smyrnans, chapter 1. He talks about an image of a cross which was exalted and placed in the churches to remind the people what Jesus did on the cross. He calls it a standard set up for all ages, which in Greek means sousomon, referring to a token or a flag. Next, we have in Tertullian's writing, Monasteries, chapter 7 and 10. He basically talks about paintings of the Good Shepherd on a chalice, which was sipped and used to teach and to represent the true meaning of the Eucharist. Given the theology, we can say here that he's teaching a type prototype distinction, and that some kissing is also implied when he says that the chalice was sipped with images on it, where the painting is the type and it passes to the prototype of Christ, which is who is represented as the Good Shepherd. Another example is Clement of Alexandria in Book 3, Chapter 11 of the Instructor, where he says, quote, the word allows for us a signet ring for this purpose only. Let our seals be either a dove or a ship or a fish. And he talks about in the context about how it was used to remember the apostles. I just provided a total of 8 different examples of icon veneration from different church writers before 325 AD. Now for a little cherry on top. In the martyrdom of Ignatius and martyrdom of Polycarp, you have first century Christians who took their remains as relics to keep and venerate. Now this is important because I said theology and iconography are inseparable, given the evidence that they venerated Christians even after they died. This definitely shows a veneration and worship distinction in their theology, which allows for it to also apply to iconography. And with that being said, I will concede the rest of my time.
All right, Ty, thank you for that opening statement. Up next is Rami for his opening statement. Rami, you get 10 minutes whenever you begin to speak. I'll start your timer, and if you want, I'll warn you when you have 1 minute left.
All right. So thank you everyone for this debate. Thank you for Ty for the opportunity. Thank you for, Harding for moderating and everyone else for being here. First, what I'm going to do is present some scholarship evidence to support my position about image veneration not being part of the early church. And after that, I'm going to present patristic evidence that image veneration was not part of the early church. Um, And it's going to be interesting because I have some of the church fathers that were quoted by Ty that, clearly make iconoclast statements. And so, we're going to explore this right now. First, I want to share what Richard Price, who is a Roman Catholic scholar, um, said about this practice. He said this in his Acts of Nicaea 2, where he translated the whole, Second Ecumenical Council. So he's, a famous Catholic scholar. He says, the iconoclast cause has few adherents nowadays outside of the heirs of John Calvin, but the iconoclasts claim that reverence towards images did not go back to the golden age of the fathers, still less to the apostles, would be judged by impartial historians today to be simply correct. So, you're having to basically call out your own Catholic scholars and tell them they don't know what they're talking about. Um, I also want to show you what John Halden and Leslie Brubaker said in their book Byzantium in the Iconoclast Era, a history. This is, published by Cambridge University Press. Um, and so this is what it says. Kinsinger's arguments have been widely accepted, but there are serious problems with the texts upon which they are based. Even in 1954, Kinsinger was well aware that some of the written material showed evidence of later reworking, and in recent years, the authenticity of virtually every pre-iconoclast text that he cited as evidence for the veneration of images has been questioned. Though in some cases the jury is still out, most of the basic accounts upon which the Kinsinger model rests are now accepted as later interpolations into earlier texts. So this is a very common practice. They would take a text that was about, let's say, the cross, which is not an image, and they would make it about images. So the cross as a an object does not mean image veneration. Now, I'm moving on with uh, John Halden, um, and that's going to be in page 45. The defense of the cross as an object of Christian devotion, as well as of images, is a key motif in anti-Jewish polemic of the period, designed to refute Jewish accusations of Christian idolatry, and it has been plausibly argued that most, if not all, of the references in such texts to devotion to images were either amended or interpolated by later iconophile copyists or editors. The real focus of the debate was the cross. Notice this is like exactly what I was just telling you, that they, will interpolate and amend the writings that were initially against the Jews, explaining to them why we have the cross and we're not idolaters, and they made it about images. So, that's like a very common practice. Moving on, page 50 from the Byzantium in the Iconoclast era. But holy portraits did not carry the same range of meanings in the late antiquity as they did in the Byzantine Middle Ages, and their significance changed profoundly over the course of the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries. By the year 800, the icon could serve as an intermediary between the viewer and the holy person represented. This was not the case around the year 400, nor even around the year 600. The stages in the development of the concept of the sacred portrait have been obscured by an assumption that the evolution was seamless and organic. In fact, however, it was only in the 7th century that all of the features we now associate with holy portraits fell into place, and only in the 8th and 9th centuries that they were codified. So, you guys can uh, look into this. There is a clear historical evolution of this teaching, and it was not part. It was, not even in the 400s, the 5th century. It was still not established. Now, I want to show you some other sources. A Companion to Byzantine Iconoclasm from Mike Humphreys, page 65. Indeed, what strikes a neutral reader of Nasia's Floringium is the relative paucity of its evidence. The compilers could not find any church father explicitly supporting icons. And then Richard Price, again, from his books on Nicaea too, the real problem for the iconophile cause lay elsewhere, in the poverty of support for their cause, even in the golden age of the fathers. In the context of a debate that treated the fathers of the Golden Age as the prime authority, it was a serious weakness in the iconophile cause that no single passage from any of these fathers gave an explicit stamp of approval to such veneration. So you guys can look into this. Now I'm gonna show you guys some of the church father evidence and the patristics, starting with the Council of Alvera. And by the way, all the sources will be available at the end. I'll post all the sources that I'm using. Alvera says, pictures are not to be placed in churches so that they do not become objects of worship and adoration. This is Canon 36. These were Spanish bishops that met together, and that was their conclusion, not to place images in churches. Now, I want to attack this distinction that Ty is trying to make about dulia of images, or proskinosis of images. This distinction that he said between latria and dulia. Um, so I'm gonna start with Origins. Against Celsius 3. This is what Origin says. Insane would be the most appropriate word for those who hasten to temples and worship images of animals as divinities. So notice this is the pagan thing that TY is saying we should not do. He's saying that would be wrong. Insane would be the more appropriate word for those who hasten to temples and worship images or animals as divinities. And they too are no less insane who think that images fashioned by men of worthless and sometimes most wicked character confer any honor upon genuine divinities. So he's calling you just as insane if you think that by having these images you can produce some sort of honor to genuine divinities. This idea of paying honor to the images, the type, and have it pass on to the prototype, he's calling that just as insane as worshipping the image itself. Like, you're not better. Uh, now, moving on. Origin contra Celsium, Book 7, it is in consideration of these and many other such commands that Christians and Jews not only avoid temples, altars, and images, but are ready to suffer death when it is necessary, rather than debase by any such impiety the conception which they have of the Most High God. Origen also said, for what reasonable man can refrain from smiling when he sees that one who has learned from philosophy such profound and noble sentiments about God or the gods turns straightway to images and offers them his prayers? Or
50
imagine that
seconds
by
left.
or imagine that by gazing upon these material things, he can ascend from invisible symbols to that which is spiritual and immaterial. Notice this is criticizing this idea of latria. Now, I only have a few seconds left, so I'll show you something very quickly here. The Divine Institutes from Lactantius says, wherefore it is undoubted that there is no religion wherever there is an image. Um, And Origen again said, it is not possible at the same time to know God and to address prayers to images. That's time.
All right, Rami, thank you for that. Now we're going to be moving on to our 7-minute rebuttals. Chai, it's your turn. If you want me to warn you when you have a minute left, I can do that. Just let me know right now. And
Yeah, you can.
okay, all right. So just like with your opening statement, whenever you begin to speak, I'll start your time.
All right. Well, let's start off. Rami said a couple of things there. Okay, so Rami, he told some half truths. Basically, it is true that certain scholars do admit that iconodulia was like, they say it's a later development. However, what Rami is leaving out is that you actually have scholars that are actually divided on this issue. So you have like three different positions. One position in scholarship says Richard Price, he says it was a later development. You have other positions like in the Oxford Dictionary, which says that, quote, we cannot rule out the possibility that images were venerated and that images were a part of the early Christian catacombs as early as 2nd century. I would also like to say that other clarifications would need to be made for the interpretation of this primary evidence concerning veneration. We have never claimed that all examples and forms of Christian veneration will look exactly the same as Nicaea 2 in all examples and explicitly. However, what has always been there in the deposit of the faith is the theology and support of iconodulia. The entire basis for Nicaea 2 was that proskuneo was okay to give to creatures and to icons, and that latruo, the Greek equivalent to latria, was for the Trinity alone. Now, let me get into a couple of these church father quotes to show that Rami's quotes were insufficient with answering these objections. Let me give a couple of examples of things the Gnostics and the pagans did, which we don't do. I will mainly be addressing a lot of the common quotes that he uses and Gavin Ortland uses, which don't condemn veneration, but rather idolatry. To start off, Irenaeus Against Heresies, Book 1, Chapter 25, Paragraph 6, he talks about how the Carpocrates, a Gnostic group, actually crowned an image of Jesus and placed it alongside the other Greek pagan gods. Also, they had other modes of honoring images after the way of the heathens, which could have included sacrifice, which we don't do. Moving on to the next quote, Justin Martyr in his first apology says, quote, and neither do we honor with many sacrifices and garlands of flowers, such deeds of men. Yeah, we don't make sacrifices to images and things that are not gods. What's being condemned here is sacrifices to images. The next quote is First Apology, chapter 24. Justin Martyr, he says, and this is the sole accusation you bring against us, that we do not reverence the same gods as you do, nor offer to the dead libations and the savor of fat and crowns for their statues and sacrifices. Again, we don't sacrifice the statues. Moving on to Hippolytus, Book 7, Chapter 20, he talks about the Carpocrates, that same Gnostic group again. They had counterfeit images of Christ, and he even talks about how they practice magic. Now, we definitely don't do that. It's condemning idolatry in the context. You guys can go look for yourself. Hippolytus, he has another example in his work called Apostolic Tradition, chapter 16. He says, if someone is a sculptor or painter, let them be taught not to make idols, attacking idolatry, the idea of false gods, not veneration. The next father is Clement of Alexandria in Stramata, book 2, chapter 18. He talks about sacrifices to idols. And in Stramata, book 7, the same chapter, he says that there are works of art that cannot be sacred and divine. We agree that there are works of art that are not divine gods. Next is Tertullian in his work on idolatry, chapter 16, where he actually talks about how the pagans sacrifice to idols. This is another point to emphasize that the apostolic churches do not teach this. This is condemned. Origen in book 7, chapter 64, he says, quote, Christians are to avoid temples and images. However, what Rami will not tell you is that in the Greek text of this, it doesn't actually translate as images, but rather pagan altars. This passage has nothing to do with icon veneration. In Minucius Felix chapter 10, it says, quote, why Christians have no images. However, the text does not say in the Greek translation images, but simulacra, which is statues or idols in the Greek. This passage says nothing about icon veneration. Lactantius in book 2, chapter 19 of Divine Institutes, he says that there is no religion in images. But once again, this is a mistranslation. This is not what the Greek says. Lactantius says that religion is not simulacra, the same Greek word, not in statues or idols, false gods in the context. Arnobius in book 6, chapter 9, he talks about how the pagans sacrifice the images. Of course, we don't do this. We agree that's idolatry. He also said that the pagans pray to images. We agree that that's idolatry. We pray in front of images, not to them, as if images could answer our prayers. Aristides, in his Apology 13, he talks about how the pagans will also make sacrifices to idols in further contexts. Methodius in Discourse 2, chapter 7, talks about a pagan group which believed the souls of their gods actually lived in images. We obviously don't believe that. Addressing Council of Elvira, Canon 36, this canon comes up a lot. It doesn't actually say to not have any images at all. The way the original Latin of the translation reads, what is venerated and worshipped should not be placed on the wall. The canon was disciplinary, aiming at combating pagan converts to
1
Christianity
minute.
so that they wouldn't confuse icons of gods for idols and fall back into idolatry. As scholar Bentirum notes in History of Church Councils, Volume 1, page 151. The issue isn't necessarily something becomes an object of worship, but rather the canon says what is venerated and worship should not be placed on the wall. Canon does not say that all images are banned. All right, that's it. I can see my time.
You still had 30 seconds in case you wanted to use them.
No, it's okay.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Ty. Rami, it's now your turn for your 7-minute rebuttal. Again, I'll warn you when you have a minute left, and whenever you begin to speak, I'll start your time. Just give me 2 seconds here. All right. Yep, you can begin to speak whenever you're ready. Rami, if you're there and you're talking, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll start now. I'm sorry.
Right.
So yeah, I was physically muted. So I noted a few things here. First of all, Origin says to not bow down to, well, that Christians and Jews do not make altars, images, or temples. That's three things. So if what Ty is saying is true, and Origin was against, altars, altars, and temples, that makes no sense. It's just ridiculous. Um, Now, what he also said about, the Gnostics, well, if Irenaeus himself was an image venerator, he would be insulting himself by saying that, they have also other modes of honoring these images after the same manner of the Gentiles, because he too would be honoring images after the same manner of the Gentiles. He would literally be dissing himself. That's very irrational. Uh, Now, there was also the quotes about Clement of Alexandria that came, into the discussion. Clement of Alexandria was one of the biggest iconoclasts. He wrote about it multiple times, and he was even dropped from official veneration by the Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. The Eastern Orthodox dropped him before, and then later the Catholics also dropped him when they realized that he was completely disagreeing with them on their practices of image veneration. Um, so he also mentioned a lot of symbols, like some of the quotes that he referred are about symbols. I would say that symbols are not the same thing as images, like the cross. And I would add also that having symbols doesn't make you an image venerator. It doesn't make you a symbol venerator, even, but much less an image venerator. Like, that would be a pivot if you're trying to use symbols to point out to um, image veneration. Now, uh, the Oxford Dictionary that you quoted, you said there were multiple views about the scholarship, and then you quoted the Oxford Dictionary. That's not like an authoritative, theological resource. It's like a secular resource. And then you're saying, like, all it said was, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. But then I'm showing you all the evidence for why it didn't happen. In fact, we can see how the Gnostics and the pagans were the ones to venerate images, and the church was criticizing that as an outside practice. I want to show you like a clear example of this when he mentions Justin Martyr. He spoke about Justin Martyr and said about him, hey, look, he's talking about idols. He's not talking about, the actual Christian practice of venerating images. Well, that's funny because he's completely ignoring what comes right after when he says that. I'm gonna show it to you guys. This is, Justin Martyr, the First Apology, Folly of Idol Worship, and he says the part that Ty read about not honoring, he says, and neither do we honor with many sacrifices and garlands of flowers such deities as men have formed and set in shrines and called gods, since we see that these are soulless and dead and have not the form of God, for we do not consider that God has such a form as some say they imitate to his honor. Notice that he's talking about the Christians as well. He says, for we, that's the Christians, do not consider that God has such a form as some say that they imitate to his honor, but have the names and forms of those wicked demons which have appeared. For why need we tell you, who already that know into what forms the craftsmen, Isaiah 44:9-20, Jeremiah 10:3, carving and cutting, casting and hammering, fashion the materials, and often out of vessels of dishonor, by merely changing the form and making an image of the requisite shape, they make what they call a god, which we consider not only senseless, but to be even insulting to God, who having ineffable glory and form, thus gets his name attached to things that are corruptible and require constant service. Notice that there's two sides to this argument that he's presenting. One of them is refuting the pagan side, and then the second side is presenting the Christian view. When he says, but we, and then he also says, but to be even he says, which we consider not only senseless, but to be even insulting to God, who having ineffable glory and form, thus gets his name attached to things that are corruptible and require constant service. That's like taking the name of God, Jesus Christ, attaching that to an image, and then you're doing the thing that Justin Martyr was against, that is to attach the name of God, that is, the King of Glory in heaven, to something that requires constant service. That's an icon. That would directly contradict his view of how Christians saw the world. Like, this practice is contrary to the worldview of Justin Martyr. Now, we also have something that I found very
1 minute.
interesting. Okay. Something that we had that I found very interesting is when he quoted Hippolytus. And Hippolytus was saying, hey, if someone is a maker of idols, they need to stop before they can be Christian. Like, you need to give that up. No more. Okay? Well, it would be very easy for him to say, hey, instead of making pagan idols, now you're going to be producing Christian imagery. Notice that is not what he did. Hippolytus was not like taking these artificers and making them produce Christian art, he was against that practice. He was just prohibiting it, like no more. That's not a thing. And the last thing I want to address is also this idea that like idols, like it would be shocking to me that Ty holds the position that idols were not in the form of images.
That's
Like they
time.
were in different forms, but they were also in image form. Go ahead.
All right, Rami, thank you for that. Now, Ty, you have 10 minutes to cross-exam Rami. I'll start your time whenever you're ready. Actually, give
All
me
right.
just a second here. All right, whenever you're ready.
Okay, Rami. So my first question is it okay for Jesus to be depicted after the incarnation? Yes or no?
That's a good
Rami?
question. I would say um, imagery in general is not illegal. What's illegal is the veneration of images, but it depends on what kind of iconoclast you ask. There's people that are more extreme and that will say, do not depict Christ because he's God and you can't depict God. So I would say, generally images are not like what's prohibited is the veneration, but then Christ is God and you shouldn't depict God.
You didn't really answer the question. I'm asking, well, what's your position? I didn't ask you what other people's positions are. What's yours? Do you believe it's okay to depict Christ? Yes or no? You never answered.
No, I would say do not depict Christ. I would say it's against God and the scriptures.
So you said no?
No, do not depict Christ. He's God. That would be against the
Okay,
scripture.
well, you're gonna have a problem then because this is the whole crux of the argument, the whole crux of the debate right here. You guys are seeing this. He's saying that Christ cannot be depicted, even though Christ is incarnated. This is exactly the problem. The whole argument of Nicaea 2 is that by implication, if God cannot be depicted after the incarnation, you end up having a heretical Christology that it either makes you Nestorian, where you separate Christ's natures, or you have to end up denying Jesus' humanity. The whole reason why in the Old Testament God couldn't be depicted was because he had no visible form. He was still invisible. However, after the incarnation, now that Christ is truly man and truly visible, it is okay to depict him. It's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with it at all. And if you deny that, you have a heretical Christology that denies his humanity, Rami. That's the problem here.
Okay. Was that a question?
Well, no, it's a statement. How do you reconcile that with your theology? You don't have the theology of the early church. This is like the whole crux of the problem here. You don't think Christ can be depicted after the incarnation. This is heretical. It's a heretical Christology. And you would have been excommunicated if you were part of this historic church.
Well, all I'm noticing is that you're claiming it's heretical, you're claiming it's Nestorian, and then you're not making any presentation of that. Like, how am I a Nestorian separating the two natures? I would say, like, in rebuttal to this, you're the Nestorian when you separate the flesh of Christ and depict it apart from the divine nature, and that was actually what the Council of Hieria argued. So you're just like recycling what Hieria said
Rami,
and trying to say no, you.
Rami, is Christ visible after the incarnation? Is he visible?
Christ was visible before the incarnation, sir. Abraham saw Christ and he saw the form of a man. So Christ was already visible to Abraham
We're,
in the Old Testament.
Rami, we're not talking about theophany. See, you know what I'm getting at with this question. The whole point is that there was no proper prototype to depict prior to the incarnation. God didn't have a proper prototype to depict. Hence why he didn't allow for it in the Old Testament, and there were still idols. But what I'm asking is now after the incarnation, does Christ have a proper prototype to depict?
Well, I disagree with you. You're making a state like I reject your premises. God had a proper prototype that could have been depicted at the time when Abraham was there. He could have easily made a depiction of the man that he saw with the two angels.
All right, I guess we can. I really don't know why you're doing this, Rami. It's whatever though. I'll ask you this next question. Why do you think? How come in Minucius Felix chapter 9, uh, Christians were basically accused of drinking blood by the Romans at the time? So basically, my question is, why are they being accused of drinking blood? Wouldn't that allude to the fact that they believe in the real presence?
Well, that would be a red herring from the debate we're having. But the Romans
It,
also
it, it
accused
would
the
it wouldn't
Christians of
be
all
no no
kinds
no
of things.
Rami, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be. I'm going to tell you why it wouldn't be. It's perfectly relevant to this because their theology allows for a duly lottery distinction because we don't sacrifice the Eucharist to Mary or saints. The entire purpose of why I'm bringing this up. Remember what I said in my opening statement. I said that the theology and iconography are inseparable. They go together. So the entire point, people during this time, if they believe in the sacrificial priesthood, right? What I'm saying is that latria is sacrifice, and only sacrificial worship is given to God alone. However, proskuneo, right, prostrating, you can prostrate before creatures and icons, and this isn't necessarily worship. But of course, you wouldn't understand this in your theology because you don't have these distinctions because you deny the liturgical aspects of the church's life. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay. That was again a statement. It wasn't really a question. Do you want me to address something?
Yeah, just address the fact, why isn't your theology present here? If they're accused of this, this means they had a sacrificial priesthood. You think they denied these distinctions because the theology is there, Rami? That's what I'm trying to get at. That's why I'm asking you these questions. Like, do you think they denied these distinctions?
So I categorically deny the fact that the early church had image veneration, and whatever you bring up about the Lord's Supper is a pivot and a red herring from the actual debate.
Rami, that really wasn't the question, though. That wasn't the question. The question was, is there theology in favor of the concepts of dulia and latria, which would in principle apply to icons? That was the purpose of me bringing it up. Do they have that theology
Well,
that's in
even
favor of it?
according to your own example you gave me, you're worshiping the bread because you believe that it's God. And you don't worship the image in the same way. Like, you don't give that reverence to the image. So, like, your example isn't supporting what you're saying. In your theology, they should worship the bread, but they should not worship images in the same way. Like, you're contradicting yourself right now.
It's not a contradiction. I'm gonna tell you why. Because in our theology, the whole purpose, this actually proves the point. The point is that the Eucharist, it is an image. I don't know where you got this narrative that image only means works of art. Image just literally can mean representation of something, right? The purpose of the Eucharist is that it is a real representation of Christ. And when we honor the Eucharist, right, as a type, Christ is the prototype here because that's what the Eucharist represents. That's the purpose of me bringing that up to you, because I don't know if you were aware.
Well, I think you're butchering your own theology, and I know your own theology more than you. Like, you said similitude, and that's what an image is. You're right. It is a similitude or a
Idol.
representation.
No, 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 no,
That's
no,
that's
no, no, no.
correct.
No, idols are
Like,
not.
the bread
All
is not just
images
a
are not
prototype, dude.
idols.
The bread is literally Christ. You believe this? Like the bread is not something you honor and you expect the honor to go to Christ. The bread is the body, blood, and divinity of Christ. It is the
Right.
prototype. It's not just a
Yeah.
type.
This would be an equivocation though, Rami. I don't know why you're bringing up idols right now. Did we not just tell you? Did I not just tell you all images are not idols?
You're the one who brought up similitude, and I'm showing you how you don't even understand your own theology on the Eucharist. It's not a similitude, it's not a representation. It is truly Christ. That's what you believe. You're not a Protestant, right? You don't believe that it's like, you know, you believe it's truly transubstantiated into Christ. That's your position. So you can't use that for icon veneration. Like, that would be a mistake because you don't believe the icon is truly Christ, but you do
Let me
believe the
ask you a
wine and
question.
bread are truly
Let,
Christ.
let, let me ask you another question then, since you don't think the scripture teaches a type prototype distinction.
One
You know
minute.
how you know how in the scriptures it says that Christ is the icon of the Father in Colossians 1:15. The Greek word is icon, by the way, for image. Would you say Jesus is a true representation of the Father? Because I would say, according to the scriptures here, there is a type prototype distinction being clearly taught where Christ is the type and the Father is the prototype because that's who he represents. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would say Christ and the Father are consubstantial of the same substance. Do you believe
Right.
that
I
Christ
agree.
is consubstantial with your images?
Oh, I agree. I agree they're consubstantial, but Rami, you weren't answering my question. The prototype type theology is what's being taught here, right? That's okay. Let me ask you this question. Have you read letter 65 of Carthage, Cyprian of Carthage? You know he teaches a sacrificial priesthood, right? Were you aware of that?
I've read all of
All right,
Cyprian's letters.
I just want to say you're out of time. I'll let Ramy answer that question, and then we're done.
Yeah, so I've read the letters from Cyprian, me and someone else. So I was asleep sometimes, but I've read most of them, and I do like them.
Uh, Ty disappeared.
Oops, do we lose him?
Is he? Okay, there he is.
That was weird. I don't know what just happened. Okay.
You're back. Okay.
All right. So that was Ty's 10-minute cross exam. Now, Ramy, we're gonna give you the stage to ask Ty questions for 10 minutes. Whenever you're ready, you can begin, and I'll start your time.
Okay. Well, I'm beginning right now. I want to start with what we just ended with. Do you believe that Christ is a type of the Father? Is that what you're basically telling me? Hey, look, Christ is an icon of the Father, and that's type,
Yeah.
prototype, theology. Are you saying that Christ is a type of the Father?
Yes, Christ is a true representation of the Father. That's why the scriptures can call him the image. He can be called the visible image of the invisible God. That is what scripture teaches. Yes.
Okay, well, Christ is not the type of the Father. Christ is the literal Word of God made flesh, who is God. He's not merely a type, just like an image is supposed to be the type, and like Mary, the prototype. uh like in this instance, Christ shares the essence of the Father, and so it is proper to call him the image of God because he is of the same essence. But if you were to use that for image veneration, well, you have a huge issue because the image is not the same essence as Christ. It does not possess the Holy Spirit. It is not the true and living image of the Father. So like you're I guess you're having a pretty big
Yeah,
blunder there.
Rami, right? Like we agree. By the way, we don't believe we're venerate. The veneration passes on to the actual object itself, right? It doesn't pass to the paint and the wood, but rather it passes to the prototype of who it actually represents in the image. It's not the object itself. So, of course, I agree with that.
Yeah, so you pay the religious honor to the image and you expect it to pass on to the prototype. You're still honoring the image and with expectation of that image passing on to the, prototype. Now, I'm going to confront you with some scholarship here and ask you what you
Yeah.
believe about this. Um, It says the fundamental paradox facing early Christian writers was that while images refer the onlooker to the divine, rather than possessing any divine qualities themselves, images were inevitably material and thus unsuitable to act as reference to the divine. Christianity did not face this dilemma alone. The Emperor Julian, in his Contra Christianos, expressed the same position when he compared the reverence granted the image of the emperor and the function of the emperor's portraits as both the object of supplication and of respect, with that devoted to images of divine beings. According to Julian, who himself apparently followed the position mapped by the 3rd century Neoplatonic philosopher Porphyrius, material images were created as expressions of divine essences which were otherwise imperceptible to humankind except through this particular form. Cult statues were images by means of which the celestial divinities could be grasped by the human intellect. Christianized and transferred from statues to paintings, this argument lived well into the 9th century. As we shall see, it is a major theme of the iconophile defense of sacred portraits. So these scholars here, from published by Cambridge University Press, are saying that your arguments are pagan arguments that have been Christianized. How do you address this? Like, what's your response to that?
Yeah, I address this by calling out the fact that all you've been doing this entire debate, Rami, is mainly giving secondary sources when I've been going to the primary sources of what the early Christians believe. And what I'm telling you is it doesn't really matter what the scholar says if they think this is quote unquote pagan, because we need to go to the early Christians' theology who have this concept of a dual distinction. And I'll tell you how it's different from paganism. We don't believe God is dwelling in images. We don't believe that. We don't sacrifice to images. We don't pray to images as if images can answer our prayers. We pray in front of them, but not to them, as if the object can answer your prayers. And like, we don't believe any of these things you're accusing us of, right? Like, Rami, you of all people know the Coloridians literally were excommunicated by the Catholic Church for offering sacrifices to Mary. So I don't know why you accuse us of paganism. There was a group
I'm
that did it,
doing.
and
Listen,
we condemned them.
I'm just quoting the scholars to you, and you're saying, hey, these are not the primary sources. They are experts at examining the primary sources, and they're giving you a meta-analysis of what they believe. They have been published, and like, if you want to refute what they're saying, you need to present either something stronger or equal to their claims about image veneration being present. So about this, I want to ask you, what is, in your view, you know, um, what do you consider to be your strongest patristic citation in favor of image veneration?
One of the strongest would be the one I gave in my opening statement. Procopius, when it literally says he prostrated before an icon in his martyrdom. This was in 303 A.D. by the way, so it was before 325 A.D. Procopius, he literally prostrated in front of an icon, and I could also give you, I could give you Methodius of Olympus in his second discourse on the resurrection.
It's
He
fine. I
says it
just wanted
literally.
one. I just wanted one,
Okay,
honestly. Can
okay.
you, like, post it? I want to look into it. Now,
Sure.
what part of your whole argumentation that you presented today demonstrate that image veneration was necessary in the early church?
That it was necessary.
Hmm. That's what it is in Nicaea too. It's necessary. Like, you have to venerate images, otherwise you're anathema.
Hold on. Let me give you this example really quickly. Yeah, it's like I told you, because the early church, they seen iconography. You know, it was a tool to teach, right? Like during this time, people in the like the common lady couldn't even read or write. So what I'm trying to tell you, Rami, is the reason icons are important is because it's inseparable with theology, and they were used to actually teach a lady who would not have been able to read or write historically. That's the purpose of it.
Yeah, but notice you're saying it's a tool to teach. That doesn't make it necessary. Like, the apostles didn't need to walk around with images and explain to the people, this is Jesus.
It
Like,
well,
people
Rami,
are not that brain dead, okay? And they also had something called the public reading of scriptures. So if you didn't know how to read and write, you would have one of the elders read for you, and that was, a means of teaching. Now, the view that images were for um, teaching came later, and we have records of this, like the evolution. First, they were iconoclasts, and eventually they used, they were writing, like Gregory the Great wrote about how they were for teaching and not for adoration. And that's like a point in history where there's no image veneration. Like, your whole point is to prove image veneration, but this refutes image veneration. They had these images to teach. That's not veneration. That's like didactic.
I already told you that in their theology, though, they had this concept of distinctions between what is veneration and worship. Hence, why I brought up the real presence of the Eucharist. And keep in mind, the early Christians also had, they venerated relics too, right? This is part of their theology. So I don't understand this like fallacious reasoning where you want explicit examples in every single case. We don't need that. All we need to show is the theology necessary for icon veneration. The theology is there.
But you're trying to demonstrate that image veneration was indeed an integral part of the faith and even necessary as per Nicaea II. Like if you're trying to demonstrate that Nicaea II is indeed what was historically practiced in the ante-Nicene church, well, like that's what you're trying to do, not just show me
Yeah,
that they have
I gave
images for
examples,
teaching.
right? Which I gave examples for, by the way, in my opening statement. And by the way, I sent it to you. Yeah, I provided literally eight different examples of icon veneration in my opening statement. And you will be able to look for yourself. But the main reason I was bringing it up, right, just to make a good case for it, with the supporting evidence, is you can't ignore the fact that the church's the very liturgical
1
life
minute.
itself, the very liturgical life itself cannot be separated from the theology. You say, why is it necessary? Well, we need to go back to the problem, right? Obviously, during this time in the early church, there's persecution.
I'm gonna use my
There's
last minute
persecution.
I'm gonna use my
Okay, go
last
ahead.
minute to show you what you've just told me is like historically incorrect. The texts indicate that during the centuries that Christianity was marginal, some of his adherents flirted with practices associated with other more dominant cults, but they also demonstrate that when the veneration of Christian images occurred, it was condemned. As Christianity extended its reach into the 4th century, it was not images that were honored and venerated, but a new type of cult object, relics. Religious images did not disappear, but nor were they favored with candles and wreaths. Until the last quarter of the 7th century, that privilege was reserved for relics. So they were venerating relics from the 4th century, but they were not venerating images. The thing you're trying to like tell right now is just incorrect.
Rami,
Rami,
could you throw a question mark in there so that he can answer the question? Then we're going to move on to closing statements.
Well, how do you address the scholarship that clearly disagrees with you, and even the Roman Catholic scholarship at that?
yeah, I mean, Rami, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make a case. Your entire case pretty much is appealing to scholarship and trying to make that the evidence. But rather, what I'm trying to do is go to the primary sources and only use scholarship to support the primary sources, Rami. The primary sources don't agree with a lot of the same scholarship that you're trying to use. That's the whole point, Rami. We can't just ignore the primary sources. Notice you didn't quote any church fathers like this entire time. You just keep giving me scholars. Like what is that supposed to do, dude?
Yeah. So
All right.
you
Well,
know more
we're
than
done.
all
We're
these
done. We're
scholars
done.
that looked into all the church fathers. Okay.
All right. So on that note, we're going to move on finally to closing statements, 5 minutes each. Ty, your turn to give your closing statement. Whenever you start, I'll begin your time.
Give me just a second. All right. So for my closing statement, I just wanted to demonstrate that what my opponent has done tonight was he mainly brought scholarship and tried to use that as evidence and the basis of his entire case. He barely gave any primary sources. He pivoted and he basically is trying to make the case from just scholarship alone instead of trying to do what I was asking for and bringing the primary sources and going to the church fathers themselves. I would like to talk about a couple of scriptural passages. In Exodus chapter 32, verses 46, when it talks about with the Israelites and Moses, we know that they worship the golden calf. And what's actually interesting is that in verse 6, it talks about how they burnt sacrifices. They burnt sacrifices to the golden calf. Remember what I said, right? That idols are false gods. That's what an idol is, right? There's also the example in 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 4. We know this one is a famous one. Hezekiah smashed the bronze serpent into pieces because the Israelites committed idolatry by actually making sacrifices to it. And that's the Hebrew word there in that text. If you look at it for offer, it does mean sacrifice. So they actually make sacrifices to the serpent. hence why Hezekiah destroyed it for idolatry. And all I wanted to point out tonight was that the theology of the church cannot be separated from iconography itself. We know that the church that had to go by a lot of apostolic tradition, and this is built into the liturgical life itself and in iconography. Um, I'll actually give an example really quickly of how iconography was used to teach. Um, there's the example, if you guys know anything about that icon with Christ in his left arm where he holds the book, and in his right arm where he has the three fingers together and the two fingers up. The book actually represents the Gospels and Jesus being the light of the world. Um, it's represented as him also being sovereign God over creation. The three fingers together in his right hand actually represents the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit for the Trinity, and the two fingers up represent the hypostatic union for him being fully man and fully God. That's actually an example of how historically the Christians during this time they would have been using those types of icons to teach illiterate people who couldn't really read or write. And I think tonight we did a pretty good job just demonstrating that our opponent doesn't understand these proper distinctions between what is honor, proskuneo, which is allowed and can be given to creatures and to icons, and what is latria, the worship given to God alone, which was always sacrificed in the early church. This was the early church's theology because they believe in the real presence of the Eucharist. He denies this, so of course he's not going to be able to understand why these distinctions are important. Uh, and with that being said, I mean, it's pretty much done. There's nothing else to talk about. So that's it.
All right, thank you, Ty. Rami, you get 5 minutes for your closing statement, and then do you guys know if we're doing Q&A or not? I have no idea.
We can do some Q&A if the audience wants to, and if Ty has time.
Ty, you down for that?
Yeah.
All right, then we'll do Q&A after Rami gets done with his 5-minute closing statement. I'll begin the time whenever you start.
All right, so I'm gonna start with showing some of the church fathers, as Ty is so excited about that. I could spend hours showing you guys church father after church father that talks against image veneration and all these practices. It would be, I decided to spend a lot of time on the scholarship and also present church fathers, which I have both. The scholars are discussing the forgeries, later interpolations, as we've seen. They're discussing the origins of the arguments that are presented, some of them obviously, being pagan in origin. They're presenting a meta-analysis of the church's view at the time, and that's just, uh, pointing to the historical reality that image veneration was against the early church. And, Ty is not able to address this or present contrary scholarship. He appeals to some, examples that, as I've showed you, are referred to as forgeries. All the texts that Kissinger uses have been questioned, and most of them are like known interpolations, which is basically changing the meaning, like what the actual author wrote, and you interpolate what he supposedly meant. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and show you some of the church fathers. Um, let's go with. I'm gonna start with something I didn't show you. Clement of Alexandria, which my opponent tried to use as for himself. This is what he said in his book Seven Stromata. It were indeed ridiculous, as the philosophers themselves say, for men, the plaything of God, to make God, and for God to be the plaything of art, since what is made is similar and the same to that of which it is made, as that which is made of ivory is ivory, and that which is made of gold golden. Now the images and temples constructed by mechanics are made of inert matter, so that they too are inert and material and profane. If you perfect the art, and if you perfect the art, they partake of mechanical coarseness. Works of art cannot then be sacred and divine. There are no sacred images. That does not exist. Like this refutes the claim of the Seventh Ecumenical Council. There are no such thing as sacred images in Clement's worldview, which nobody disputed. Now, I want to show you a counter to this whole idea of um, you know uh, there's this idea that um, Hippolytus of Rome was, talking about the Gnostics, and that's like Ty used that in his argumentation. I'm gonna explore this right now. This is Hippolytus of Rome, a refutation of all heresies. Certain, likewise, of these heretics brand their own disciples in the back parts of the lobe of the right ear, and they make counterfeit images of Christ, alleging that these were in existence at the time during which our Lord was on earth, and that they were fashioned by Pilate. Notice that he doubts the claim made by saying it's an allegation. So he doesn't believe that these images are actually, made by Pilate or anything like that. And he's also calling them counterfeit, like these are fake. And so, if he was himself an image venerator, he would be burning himself by the same, token. Um, Now, Clement of Alexandria, again, which, Ty tried to use. This is Traumata, Book 5, Chapter 5. Moses ages before enacted expressly that neither a graven, nor molten,
1 minute.
nor painted likeness should be made, so that we may not cleave to things of sense, but pass to intellectual objects. For familiarity with the sight disparages the reverence of what is divine, and to worship that which is immaterial by matter is to dishonor it by sense. This completely refutes the idea that, you can pay religious honor to an image and expect it to pass on to the prototype, and that is, like a good thing. That is like a Christian theology that was somehow there, because he's completely refuting this ideology, just like Origen did by calling it no less insane. You're no less insane if you think, you can honor the image and have that honor pass on to that which the image represents. Now, finally, I'm going to show you from Tertullian on idolatry, chapter 1. The principal
Nope,
crime of...
you're not going to do that because you're out of time.
We're out of time? Okay, well, thank you,
Mhm.
Ty. Thank you, everyone. I'll post it in the chat so you guys can read it. And that's going to be, my last quote.
All right. Well, thank you guys for a relatively clean debate. I guess we're going to be moving on to Q&A now. I'm going to figure out how this stage thing works. So I assume, let me see. Okay, there you go. I can invite to speak. The first hand I saw was this one.
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
So I guess just state who you're going to ask your question to, and then whoever you ask it to can answer, and the other guy can respond, and then last word to whoever it was asked to.
Okay, I kind of had I kind of had like this. Okay, so my question is for Rami. So Rami, you were talking about the idea that the honor of the prototype goes to the typer, and you were denying that in this case. But I would assume that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that if someone presented to you like an Eastern icon of Jesus, that you wouldn't take that icon and like spit on it and throw it in the trash and like burn it. Um, and I'm gonna assume, because I think I've heard you say this in the past, that that would be kind of disrespectful to do that towards. It seems like it'd be disrespectful to do that because it would be in some way disrespecting like Jesus. Um, but if dishonoring the image gives dishonor to Christ, why doesn't honoring the image give honor to Christ?
I don't think that dishonoring the image dishonors Christ. And if it was up to me, we would not have religious imagery. I think it's against God and the scriptures, and I wouldn't mind destroying like an Eastern icon of Jesus. Now, the reason I say it's disrespectful is because it would offend the Eastern Orthodox, and that would hamper my attempt of evangelism. Like I don't want them to get pissed at me, but I don't think desecrating the icon is desecrating Christ. Christ would actually appreciate that. Christ would be like, good job getting rid of this filthy piece of wood that these people are venerating. Thank you, Rami. Like God would, congratulate me for that.
Rami, do you mind if I ask you one more thing? It's a quicker one.
Before you do that, Ty, if you have anything to say about that, you can comment.
What did he say? I wasn't
All
really
right.
listening.
Well, that's fine. Cough drop. You could just ask your second question then.
So my second question is more historical. Eusebius of Caesarea in Ecclesiastical History, Book 7, chapter 18 and 19, he talks about these, quote, remarkable memorials at a certain city. And he talks about explicitly how there was a throne that James, the relative of Jesus, was told that, like, he was said to sit on and things like that in Jerusalem, and there was a statue of Jesus there. So how do you respond to the fact that Eusebius, writing in 200s, 300s, talks about how there were already statues that were, quote, remarkable?
So if you go to what he's talking about, I'll post it right now. This is very funny to me. He's trying to use this to be look. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he says, since I have mentioned this city, I do not think it proper to omit an account which is worthy of record for posterity. So he's recording this. For they say that the woman with an issue of blood who, as we learn from the sacred gospel, received from our Savior deliverance from her affliction, came from this place, and that her house is shown in the city, and that remarkable memorials of the likeness of the Savior to her remain there. For they stand upon an elevated stone by the gates of the house, a brazen image of a woman kneeling. And then he goes on to describe the thing that's like it's got like some plants growing, and it's got like the woman, and it's got Christ. Now, look at this. Look at this. This is what he says right after. Okay, in the same chapter, he says, they say that this statue is an image of Jesus. It has remained to our day, so that we ourselves also saw it when we were staying in the city. Nor is it strange that those of the Gentiles who of old were benefited by our Savior should have done such things, since we have learned also that the likeness of his apostle Paul and Peter and of Christ himself are preserved in paintings, the ancients being accustomed, as it is likely, according to a habit of the Gentiles, to pay this kind of honor indiscriminately to those regarded by them as deliverers. So he's literally calling it a pagan practice, and he's saying that it's indiscriminate. Like he's not saying that's good, he's saying no wonder, nor is it strange that those of the Gentiles, like these guys are pagan, and that's where they got it from, and that's why they're doing that. He's literally saying that's not a Christian thing, that's a pagan thing, and actually in Christianity we don't need that. Like this refutes you. It's hilarious that you bring this to me, but then every time you tell me I quote mine, but I show you how you're quote mining. He's calling it pagan. like you just burned yourself. I love it.
All right, well, we'll stop there. Ty, if you have anything to say about that, go ahead. If not, I'll bring the next person up on stage.
You can bring the next person up.
All right. I did not keep track of the order. I don't quite care either. So first person I lay eyes on is who I invite up. There you go.
Someone was in the house. Everybody watch him out. I have a question for Remy. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Go ahead.
I bet. So, it's kind of a too many questions. So, do you acknowledge that first in Colossians 1:15 that it's calling Jesus the icon of the Father?
Yes.
Okay. So, since Jesus being the icon of the Father, would that insinuate that the Father is the prototype?
Incorrect. You're presupposing your pagan theology right now.
Okay,
That's
so
not part of the Jewish worldview. Christ is
yeah,
the same essence of the Father.
okay. So that's why the reason I asked, because I'm on the 1504 Greek concordance, and it says icon. The first thing it says icon. It assumes a prototype of which it not merely resembles, but from which it is drawn. Then is more than a shadow rather than a replication. So Christ being the type or the image or the icon of the Father, why wouldn't that assume that the Father is the prototype?
So Christ is not merely a type of the Father. Like what you're saying right now is blasphemous to Christ, because you're saying that the image you venerate is a type that is meant to honor the prototype, just like Jesus is a type that is meant to honor the prototype, the Father. But Jesus is literally one essence of the Father, with the Father. He's not like made of wood. Like the Christ and the Father are consubstantial. The icon of like Mary is not consubstantial with Mary. It's not made of like Mary. Christ is literally God. The icon is not literally God. You have a symmetry breaker here. Your analogy does not work. Like, this is not your theology about, icon veneration.
Yeah, I know you're a modalist. So what do the scriptures mean when it says to honor Christ is to honor the Father? Wouldn't that mean to honor the type would be to honor the prototype, just like how you venerate an image, which is the type of the actual person, which is the type of the actual person you're venerating. Wouldn't that mean that you're venerating the person that's on the image, the same way that you honor Christ is honoring the Father? Did you get the
No, I
analogy?
disagree. When I honor Christ, I'm worshiping God. That's what I'm doing. When I'm honoring, like when you are honoring an image, you are not worshiping God.
Wait,
That is
God as essence,
not the
or
same thing. Those things are different. Trying to associate them as the same is like you're trying to reread your, man-made theology into what the scriptures say. I will
I
always
said God as
categorically disagree.
All right, guys.
I
I
said God
realized
as
that if
essence or God as the Father.
Soma, I realize that if you guys keep having like mini debates like this, we're not going to get through everybody's questions. So Soma, if you want to come back later and ask a
Okay, I'll come back
question.
later. Yeah, that's cool.
All right.
That's cool.
So
I am
next up, now that I know how to keep track of the order, Chicken of the Sea.
Can I be heard?
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. We changed my audio settings. Okay. My question is for Rami. First, I just wanted to make a comment that Clement was not dropped by the Orthodox for his view in iconography. St. Photius, he actually charged him with Docetism. That's why he is not venerated in the Orthodox Church. So I just wanted to clear that up. But my question is, do you accept the Council of Nicaea, the statement that Christ was incarnate and made man?
Yes.
Okay. And man is circumscribed, right?
I believe the essence of God is uncircumscribed. That's actually part of church history, by the way.
Let me
Like,
ask my
Christ
question
is
again.
incarnate and fully God, but he is not circumscribed at all. He's still like omnipresent. He's still God.
Let me ask the question again. Is man circumscribed?
Man is circumscribed.
Okay. And you agreed with the statement that Christ was incarnate and made man. So I assume that you affirm the statement that Christ has the same nature as man.
Christ is fully God and fully man. That's why he's
Yeah.
uncircumscribed.
Okay.
He's omnipresent.
Do you agree with St. Augustine on the Holy Trinity that Christ is circumscribed?
Well, I can show. I would need to look at the quote and evaluate what what it's saying, and I will show you contrary evidence where they talk about how the church fathers will say how Christ was also in heaven. That's what he said, right? He said that he was in heaven even while he was on earth. Like, Christ doesn't cease to be God; he's fully God, and therefore God is uncircumscribed. Like Christ doesn't like lose his divine attributes. That would be a heresy.
So to make it easier for you, I posted the quote from St. Augustine. We believe also that he sitteth at the right hand of the Father. This, however, is not to lead us to suppose that God and the Father is, as it were, circumscribed by human form, so that when you think of him as the right hand side shoulder suggests it. Yeah, I posted it here.
Is
So,
not circumscribed. This refutes
yeah,
you.
the Father,
That's
the
exactly
Father.
the opposite of what you're
Rami,
saying.
who does it say here? The Father or the Son?
Well, it says God. It says God
It
is
says
not circumscribed.
God who? God
Well,
who?
he doesn't,
It says it, God the Father.
No, he says God is not circumscribed. Do you think that Augustine did not hold that Christ was God?
It says here, God the Father is not circumscribed by human form. Can you see where I posted this?
Hold on, I have the quote. I have this quote in my files. I'll get the quote itself.
I just posted it in the chat.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to let you interact with that, and then we're going to move on.
Okay, anyway, this is something that's well established in the patristics that Christ is circumscribed. If you deny that Christ is circumscribed, then you deny that Christ truly has our nature. And if you deny Christ truly has our nature, then you, sir, are a Docetist. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm gonna refute what she's saying. The quote that she posted is said that God is not circumscribed. Christ is God. Christ is not circumscribed. But I'm gonna support this with other, church fathers. Clement, in his Traumata Book 7, says, for it is not the case that rightly and truly we do not. Hold on. Let me get the proper quote here. Okay. This is okay. Faith of the Creeds, Augustine chapter 7. That's the one. We believe also that he sits at the right hand of the Father. This, however, is not to lead us to suppose that God the Father is, as it were, circumscribed by a human form, so as that we think of him a right side or a left shoulder suggests itself or a left should suggest itself to the mind, nor again when it is thus said in express terms that the Father sits. We are not to fancy that this is done with bended knees, lest we should fall into that profanity in dealing which an apostle execrates those who change the glory of the incorruptible God into the likeness of corruptible men. For it is unlawful for a Christian to set up any such image for God in a temple. Much more nefarious is it, therefore, to set it up in the heart, in which truly is the temple of God, provided it be purged of earthly lust and error. So all these images is actually like being refuted by this argument that Augustine is making, and they're using this to try to support image veneration. Like Augustine is literally saying the opposite here. And yeah, so if you just, if you try to separate Christ's flesh from his body and depict the flesh separate from, his flesh from his divinity, and you depict his flesh apart from his divinity, you're a Nestorian heretic. Thank you.
All right, next up, warfare, and yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, everybody. I was a little bit distracted. Like I said in the beginning, this was impromptu. So I'm gonna try to be quicker on the draw next time. So warfare, when I get you up here, ask one question, mute yourself, let Ramy answer, and then we'll just move on. We'll just keep going that way. Get through everybody, and then if you guys just want to come back up on stage afterwards, that's fine.
I can't hear you, warfare.
You're muted.
Yo, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, hold up. Was there an actual proposition for this debate?
Yeah, it was image veneration as described at Nicaea 2 part of the pre-Nicene church?
And then was there like a rigorous definition for image veneration?
Nope.
Well, it was
Okay.
according to what the Seventh Ecumenical Council says. That's very
Yeah,
accurate.
but that's not a rigorous definition. But that's fine. I was just curious to see if that ever got hammered out. It sounds like it didn't. But so my next question would be for Rami, and I'll try to keep it short and sweet. If somebody walked up to you and they're like, "Hey, could I get a? Do you have a picture of your great grandma, or like anybody in your family who's passed away?" And you handed them the picture, and they spit on it and threw it on the ground and stamped it out with their foot. Two questions: how would you feel?
That's your question? How I would feel if someone did that?
How would you feel? Yeah, if that what I
I
just
would
described
think
happened.
that they're intentionally trying to disrespect me and my family. That's what I would think.
And so, how would you feel about that?
Well, it's like I just said, they would be trying to, you know, dishonor like me and my family by doing that. So I wouldn't obviously, want that to happen. I wouldn't like it.
Okay. Well, like I
so
said, it was going to be. I said it was going to be like one question each. That was like really short. I mean, yeah. If I'm going to
well,
be fair,
the
you're going to
other
have to
question
get
is,
back
what
in
do you
line.
think? How would your grandma feel, or
I don't think my
whoever it was that
grandmother
was
would
in
be
the?
insulted in any way, shape, or form.
Ah, okay. So that contradicts the earlier thing with chicken. Perfect. Thanks.
Incorrect. Like my grandmother is not insulted when somebody tries to insult her picture because she's already passed on. It does not care. Now I understand it's an attempted attack on the person, but like it doesn't dishonor the person. Just like when you dishonor an image of Christ, you do not dishonor Christ himself. And that is 100% consistent with what I've been saying. Like, yeah, you could desecrate all the icons in the world and burn them, and Christ would not be dishonored one bit.
All right. Next up, Dire Wolf. Again, you get one question. Mute yourself. Let Rami respond, and get back in line if you want to come back up.
Well, don't you guys have questions for Ty? Like, it's always me.
I think you're the target tonight.
That's great.
You
Let's
always
go.
like to
Bring
be
it
the
on.
center of attention, good sir, so why not? My question is actually for Ty. Let's give Rami a break.
Okay.
No, I can. I love this. You guys are literally burning yourselves with the things you're presenting.
So now you're jealous that I want to ask Ty a question. Noted. I'm putting this in my notes. Okay, so Mr. Ty, my one question, then I'll shut up and leave you alone, is also Krim, shut up. So my question is, why do you get up here and debate Rami when there's usually always a predetermined outcome to, I guess, said debate? Okay, thank you.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I basically I did it because usually we know how Rami is. In a lot of these VCs, when you try to do it in an informal setting, a lot of times I get muted or he would interrupt, unfortunately. So I was like, well, I'll challenge him to a formal setting where I can actually speak. That was why.
Okay. Next up is Darth Zaysky.
Yo, how y'all doing? How y'all doing? My question is for Ramy, the follower of a pagan. I'm stop playing. Let me stop playing before he gets mad at me.
You think Jesus is a pagan?
I know I think you are, but
Oh.
in what way does when does a secondary source ever become greater than a primary source?
Well, this is a secondary source that are presented are scholars that are analyzing the view of the church at the time. If you disagree with our scholarship, please present different, better scholarship that would present your case. I also have a huge amount of church fathers. If you guys are interested, we'll go down to a room and we'll do a shoot-off of iconoclast church fathers versus iconophiles, and we'll see who can last longer. Like, you give me one iconophile, I'll give you one iconoclast. You give me one iconophile, I'll give you one iconoclast. We go 1 for 1 until somebody runs out. I officially challenge all of the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholics right now to do this with
You
me.
do know. Wait, wait, wait. While
Your
you're
money
monologuing, you
where
haven't
your
answered
words
the
are,
question.
and
You
do the
haven't
thing
answered
that
the
All
you're
right.
question
you're
though.
gonna do.
You
Go
haven't
ahead.
answered the question though. You haven't answered the question though. You started waffling, and I'm not even the one debating you. All I asked was, when does a
Yeah, I
secondary
mean,
source become a primary source? If you can't answer that, that's fine. I'll just step down.
Yeah, it's called a meta-analysis. Like, it's a combination of all the primary sources, and it's giving you an overview of the, opinion of the church at the time. And then I can go to the individual sources that are stated and sourced in those documents to show you why they say that. Like, I'm showing you the overview that the scholars hold on this topic to establish the fact that icon veneration is a pagan practice that was imported into the church. And then literally the same documents will have list the church fathers, reference which writings they spoke about, and then that's why I'm challenging you right now to this war on what the church fathers believed. Go ahead, like, produce your sources, I'll produce mine. I'm sure
all
that
right. I think we're good.
yeah, you'll see what happens, right? Like, you know what's gonna happen. Go ahead and do it.
All right. Next up, B-Hog.
All right. We can't hear him. Is he speaking?
I don't think he is. B-Hog, you there?
He probably having connection issues.
Bring someone else
Yeah,
until he's back.
he tagged me. He said he's having audio issues. I'll follow Blackout's advice. I'll bring up Victor, since most of the questions have been for Rami
Oh
so
boy,
far.
here we go. Victor,
Hey
what's
guys.
up, buddy? What's up?
Great debate.
And
I'm enjoying it.
I'm just gonna throw this out there, Ty, if you're okay with it. This is just came through my mind. Since almost every question has been for Rami so far, maybe we could allow Victor to ask you, like, I don't know, 3 questions so you can get a chance to actually speak more.
Well, I
We
was
don't
gonna
need that. It's fine.
I was hoping to ask a question to get them both to comment on.
Okay.
Sure, it's fine.
Okay, so I don't think it really got touched on too much. That this is kind of a compound issue that
Mhm.
we can see within the church the presence of icons, but the treatment of them is what's important, which later becomes a mandate. And so, in light of the kind of warnings that we see in the writings of the early church fathers, so not to fall into idolatry, I'd just like you guys both to speak a little bit about the wisdom of then mandating veneration to people who may be more susceptible to falling into idolatry.
Me first or Rami?
Go ahead.
I could first. Yeah. I mean, it was like I said in my opening statement. Like, the main thing is when it comes to idolatry, right? It's understanding what this properly is, right? It all has to do with a internal disposition to believe that a created object is God, right? And also, here's the main thing, which wasn't really addressed. The way that the pagans honored their images, right? The reason why they were attacking idolatry is because these pagans believe in all sorts of crazy things. Like, for example, they would sacrifice to their images. Keep in mind that a lot of them believe that their quote gods actually dwelt within images. Because what pagans would do is they basically carve out an idol as a body for their gods, and then the spirit would come locate the idol, dwell within it. There were pagan groups that they were attacking which believed these things. So that's kind of the main charge of why idolatry is so strong. But what I was trying to point out was that these same patristics do allow for certain forms of honoring icons that it's Christian. It's not the way of the pagan to honor images. Like there's a distinction. That's why I was trying to get at with the whole theology that they have, because they believe in sacrifice, and sacrifice was only given to God.
Well,
Like we would agree, you can't sacrifice to an image. That's idolatry, which is what pagans were doing.
well, that's why I was focusing mostly on the mandate, because where there is no image, there can be no image veneration. So the mandate forces everyone, the weak and the strong, to have to deal with the image and treat it appropriately, which can lead people into sin. So that's why I really wanted to focus on the mandatory effect
Mm-hmm.
that comes.
Like why it's mandatory.
But I mean, we can leave it at that. Ramy, you want to talk about it?
Yes, I actually do want to touch on a few things that were mentioned there. The most important thing for me is first this whole idea that Ty is trying to present about, it's like the veneration of images is okay because of a certain kind of theology. Actually, I want to refute this right now by referring to the example that he used, which is the brazen serpent. This is from 2 Kings 18, verse 3, and he did what it talks about King Hezekiah, and he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that David his father did. He removed the high places and break the images and cut down the groves and break in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. For unto those days the children of Israel did burn incense to it, and he called it Nehushutan. Now, notice he keeps saying, hey, this, like, we don't offer sacrifice to our images. This is a big difference. Well, incense burning was reserved for God, and the mode of burning incense was very specific. It had to be the priests. They had to have a specific kind of incense. They had to have a specific kind of of fire, and they needed a specific altar. And that was always burned for God, never for images. When they did burn incense to the brazen serpent, that is a real relic, like that's a holy relic, and they burnt incense to it, that was considered idolatry, and it was broken. So notice that the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholics burn incense to images and statues, which would be considered idolatry, like just like it was considered idolatry in the times of King Hezekiah, it would be considered idolatry today. And that's why we're Protestants. We're against those practices because the burning of incense is reserved for God, never for images.
If I can get back in line if you want, or go with one more comment.
I mean, I guess it's up to Ty, to be fair, since I assume that. Well, who's the next question for?
He can get back
It
in
was
line.
another open-ended
Okay,
one.
all right.
I'll get back in line.
Yeah,
It's fine.
yeah. I think that probably best.
Throw me back down there with the peasants.
All right. B-Hog, are you back? Tag me in chat if you are. All right.
Okay. Am I working now?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, my question's for Ty.
Yeah.
Ty, can you cite a second century commentary on the Bible from a church father or significant person in the church exegeting the text showing icon veneration?
Second century. Well, I can give you commentary, but what I would say is, I would appeal to the scriptures of the fact that because proskunea and laturo, these distinctions for worship and veneration exist in the scriptures. So I would just appeal to that. Like the theology is in there already. That would be my response.
Can I interact with this?
So, well, just to
Yeah.
follow up. So, the answer in summary, you would say, no, I cannot provide a source that would give a commentary on the scriptures exegeting the text in order to show icon veneration.
Yeah, no, not a commentary. I could give you something else, but a commentary specifically, no. Just to answer your question.
Thank you.
All right, Rami, if
So
you want to answer that, go ahead.
yes, I want to comment on this. It's important because if you go to the Greek Septuagint, the word proskineo or proskinosis, and its like root word, is the thing that says do not do in the commandment. Like if you go to the commandments of God and you read what you should not do is proskineo or proskinosis. That's banned. That's what's spoken against. The exact same word. Like in the Bible, it says do not proskinosis to images. It's wrong. The Seventh Ecumenical Council says you must proskinosis to images, otherwise you're anathema. This again is why we are Protestants. This a distinction that he's trying to make, like it's okay to venerate images, it's really not there in the Bible. It says do not do proskinosis to images. That's what the Bible actually says.
Arden, can I answer that real quickly? Yeah,
Well, I had another question. Can I ask another question? Harding?
sure.
Sorry, I thought I was unmuted. I mean, technically, since the question was initially to Ty, he does get to have the last word on that question. And
Okay.
Before you ask your question, let me respond to what Rami said really quickly. This will be a case of a word concept fallacy, Rami, because no one is denying that there's a proskuneo in certain contexts which God doesn't allow for it, but that's never been a part of the main argument. The main point is that there are other contexts in the scriptures where proskuneo was given before holy objects such as the Ark of the Covenant and before men, and God accepted this, and this wasn't idolatry. So we agree here. This is just be word concept fallacy. There's different contexts where it's okay and where it's not okay.
all right.
No, we don't agree. And I would
Oh,
say it's never okay to
r-
venerate images. There is no proskuneo of images. Not once.
okay, well, Ty, I'm going to give you the last word since it was supposed to be for you.
Okay. Yeah, I would also like to just add on pretty much to what Rami was saying. Rami's telling half truth here, because it is true in that commandment. It says, do not give proskynesis in the context. But God also says, neither serve him. Now, that Greek word for serve in the Septuagint is latria. So in the context, it's don't do both.
Either
Don't do
one.
neither.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't do either one. Right. But it's in
Exactly.
that but it's in that context. You see the problem here? It's you have to ignore all other examples of scripture, such as Revelation 3:9, where Christ actually commands men to come and give proskunea at certain people's feet, and it's accepted. To be consistent with this interpretation, well, you wouldn't say Christ commanded idolatry in Revelation 3:9. That same word is used there, and it's okay.
All right. We're
Yeah,
done with this line of questioning.
gotcha. Oh,
Yeah,
can I
men
ask
are not
another
images.
question, or did you want me to step down, Harding? How do you want to do it?
I mean, like, I don't know. This has been kind of all over the place. I'll just.
Uh,
I assume
Your
your
call.
next question was going to be for Ty, so I'll just leave it up to Ty since, like I said earlier, he's been getting much
I
less
would
questions than.
I would prefer he gets back in line to ask this
All right.
next question, just so other people come up. That's why.
All right. Cool. Next up is form.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Stick to one question.
Ty, firstly, congratulations on winning. And secondly, I would like to ask you if it is that iconoclasm uh, or is something that was invented, which I believe it to be, in the 8th century in the Byzantine Empire. Why do you believe it was invented at that time and was not invented earlier?
Well, mainly because historically, a lot of the iconoclast influence, if you do your research on this, it came from Islam. That's funny enough. Which Rami he will leave this out and not tell you that, but that's actually where that's where the influence sprung up from. It actually originated from Islam, and then eventually it started to influence certain people within the church. That's exactly where it originated from. That's why it doesn't pop up until the 7th century. It's like the whole point.
All right, Rami, you get to. Were you done, Ty? I guess it was done. Rami, you can comment on that, and then Ty gets the last word, and then next questioner.
Okay, so I want to respond by reading, there's actually sources that talk about this, and no, it is not Islamic influence that made them be iconoclasts. In fact, if you look into it, they, the Byzantines, saw themselves as the chosen people of God. You know, just like the Israelites, they're like the people of God as a nation. And so for them to be losing against the Muslims that were invading them was basically they saw it as God not being on their side. Just like when the Israelites would lose wars, it's because God is not on their side. And so they started looking for sins that would lead God to not be on their side. And the most basic sin that they came up with was idolatry. They noticed all these idolatrous practices in their nation, and they read the scriptures and they thought to themselves, oh, when these Israelites became idolaters, God sent their enemies against them to punish them. We in the Byzantine Empire have become idolaters, and God is sending our enemies, the Muslims, to punish us. What should we do? And so they repented of their idolatry and, actually, made, iconoclast decisions where they held councils and they brought in the bishops. They paid for investigations into the historicity of image veneration, and they concluded that it was not historical, not part of the early church, not Christian, and they repented of it. And in conclusion, many of these iconoclast emperors were very successful militarily. They were beloved by their people, and I can present you evidence for this. I do have this in Byzantium in the iconoclast era. It talks about this. That's where I learned these things.
All right, Ty, the question was for you. Last word.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say to respond to what what Rami said. There was some internal conflicts within the church with the whole iconoclast controversy. I'm not denying that was the case, right, with the Byzantine emperor at the time, who wanted images to be destroyed. But we just can't deny the fact that there were certain groups from Islam which did have some influence, maybe not completely, but definitely some influence. And I don't think that Rami should ignore that. It's important, because they didn't think that God could be depicted after the incarnation, things like that, right? Like, these people denied the deity of Christ. So what do you expect?
All right.
Can I ask a second question?
No, you can't. I'm sorry.
Okay.
All right. Next up is Soma. One question and tell us who you're directing it to.
Hello?
Hello?
You hear me?
Mm-hmm.
The question is for Remy. So
Go
it's
ahead.
it's a simple question, but I mean, you like know the context, right? In the hit series Avatar: The Last Airbender, Season 2, Episode 5, the gang appears to be in an Avatar festival. So at the festival, there are 3 statues of the 3 past avatars, Roku, Kyoshi, and Aang. They then proceed to burn those 3 statues of the avatar. What do you think their rationale was, or their goal was, in burning those 3 avatar statues, Remy?
I have no idea. I don't know what you're talking about. You're talking about some movie or some like TV show?
Indeed. But
Yeah,
All right.
I've no idea
But
what their
using the
intention was.
previous
I'd have to
context,
watch the show, and maybe then I could give you a proper
I
response.
don't think
I
it's.
haven't seen it.
All right,
I
that
can't comment on something I haven't seen.
all right. That was a fantastic question. Best one of the night so far. Peter is up next.
Hello, hello. You guys hear me?
Hello. Yep.
Yeah,
One
we
question.
can
Tell
hear
us who you're directing it to.
You're cutting out.
You're cutting out, Peter.
Yeah.
Type my question in the side chat then if I'm cutting out.
Well, we
Is
heard
that cool?
that.
Okay, I'll just say it. So my question is for Ramy. So why didn't you quote anything from the early church instead of just reading from scholars and proposing an actual argument? That's it.
Well, I read like 10 things from the early church, maybe more, but I can, read more. If, like I said, I challenge every one of you that's an Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic that thinks you have more sources about iconophiles in the early church than about iconoclasm against images. I officially challenge you right now. We're going to go into a VC after this. We're going to go one for one. You present your evidence, I'll present mine, and let's see what happens. I will demonstrate to you only from the patristic record how image veneration is not historical, and I've demonstrated it already by quoting many church fathers and quoting meta-analysis from scholars who evaluate all of the views of the different church fathers in a holistic manner. And there's this consensus that image veneration is a later innovation. Even Roman Catholics will agree to this. Like, what are you guys doing? You guys are arguing against your own Catholic scholars at this point.
All right, Ty, if you want to comment on that, you can. If not, we'll just move on. We've got 4 questioners left. The last one's going to be Flash 84, then we're done.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much like I was saying. It's not necessarily bad to use scholars. However, the problem was that Rami was trying to use the scholars to just use that as his argument in his entire case, instead of rather going to the primary sources to prove his case and then only using the scholars to support his case. He should have did that instead of just relying on the scholars for his case, which is what he did tonight.
Rami, last word. Question was for you.
Well, I didn't rely only on scholars. I showed you from Tertullian. I showed you from Origen. I showed you from Justin Martyr. I showed you from Arnobius. I quoted Melito. I quoted Clement of Alexandria. I quoted Hippolytus of Rome. I also quoted the Divine Institutes of Lactantius. I quoted Irenaeus. Again, Clement of Alexandria. And I quoted the Council of Alvera, which is a collection of church fathers from 306. So maybe you guys live in an alternate dimension where I did not mention all these guys, but I'm confident Blackout recorded this, and we can go back throughout the debate and look at everyone that I spoke about.
All right. On that note, next questioner, Chicken of the Sea again. This time around, we're going to stick to one question. So, yeah. Chicken, make sure you formulate your question precisely and get what you want out of it, because then we're going to move on. No mini debates this time.
We can't hear you.
Chicken, are you there? Chicken. Okay, well, we're going to move on to Victor, I guess, then.
Yeah. Put Victor back up there.
Hey guys, Victor again. Good to see you.
What's up?
Great debate. I'm having a heck of a time. So it's another kind of open question. What I'd like to hear is your comments on my, my summation of the importance of this debate, which is, that we're not very close together on this issue whatsoever on the second commandment. That it's really a matter of approaches. That one side is looking to get as close to violating it as possible and get away with it, and the other side wants nothing to do with angering God over any insinuation that we might be participating in idolatry. And I just would like to hear both of your thoughts on how far apart or close together you think our two sides are on this issue.
Oh well, Rami here is definitely very far apart. I mean, he throughout the entire debate, he's been accusing us of paganism, which is, I think that's a crazy claim because we don't. He should know we don't teach we worship multiple gods. That's really what paganism means. But I mean, the main issue is just that obviously in Rami's theology doesn't allow for these proskyneolatria distinctions because he doesn't believe in the real presence of the Eucharist, which was always a propitiatory sacrifice given only to God. And also remember what I said concerning iconography. It's inseparable from theology itself. Iconography declares orthodoxy, what the Orthodox faith was, and the entire argument behind Nicaea 2 of why this is mandatory is because I would hope he would agree that the incarnation and God, Christ being able to be depicted after the incarnation, that's very important. That's why we would say this is necessary because it's the only way to maintain Orthodox Christology.
Okay. So first, I want to talk about this whole sacrifice of Christ. So the Roman Catholics believe that the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, is truly the flesh, body, and divinity of Christ. That's like truly Christ. That's not a type of Christ. That therefore, for him to bring this up to try to establish his theology of type and prototype is not only fallacious, it does not build the case that by honoring the bread, you're honoring the prototype of Christ, because they believe that by honoring the bread you're truly worshiping Christ, which they do not believe is the case with images. They don't give the images the same worship apparently that they give to God, the true and living God. Now that's their claim. Again, this is one of the first things I showed earlier today when I spoke about the Church Fathers, and it was against Celsius, Book 3. Insane would be the more appropriate word for those who hasten to temples and worship images or animals as divinities, and they too are not less insane who think that images fashioned by men of worthless and sometimes most wicked character confer any honor upon genuine divinities. It's impossible for Origen to make this statement and at the same time believe that it's good to venerate images because the honor will pass on to the true and living God that the image, of Christ represents. Like, it cannot be the case that he held to this theology, and he's a witness of the theology of his time. So, everything Ty has been trying to feed you guys is just historically incorrect. They did not believe that image veneration would pass on to the one being represented. That's a much, much later innovation, as we have seen, already.
All right. That was an open-ended question for both, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no last word for Ty there. We're just going to move on to the next question. Chicken lagged out, so I'm going to bring her back up. Okay, wait, hold on. So Pedro was there. He was on the list, and now he's gone. So I assume he's just gone for the night. I don't know. Sergeant's been asking to ask a question. He's been asking me if he could ask a question. If Rami and Ty are fine, we could replace Pedro with Sergeant since he just lagged out. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah, that's okay. Bring him up.
All right. I assume Blackout was the one who was allowing them to come back up or whatever. Um, so hold on. Stand by. Happened. Okay. So up next is Chicken.
Can I be heard this time?
We can hear you.
Yeah, we
Okay,
can.
excellent. Sorry about that. My app crashed last time. Okay, so question is for either one, it doesn't matter. It was just wanting to know what your opinions are on this Protestant scholar, Hugh Wybrew. He writes this in his book. On other aspects of late Christian art was to become a great importance in the Eastern Christian tradition, both in private devotion and in corporate worship, and that was portraiture. It is quite possible that Christians began painting portraits of distinguished and venerated members of the church very early on. That's the quote.
Can I go first?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
First, it said late Christian art. Notice, so yes, exactly. A feature of late Christian art is to be venerated. That is absolutely true. That's the claim that I've been saying over and over and over again. That's the scholarship that I've presented, is that this is a later type of Christian art. Even if there were images before, the images were not venerated. And I've also shown, basically scholarship and church fathers on this. So yeah, I absolutely agree. Amen.
It actually says early on, not later on, Rami.
No, at the
We're
beginning it
not,
says late
guys. We're not
Christian
going to
art.
do follow-ups this time.
No, in the beginning it says late Christian art. Can you post the quote you just read? Please post it. It says one of the
Yeah.
features of late Christian art, and then it mentions the veneration, and then it mentions how possibly images might have been there before, which I agree with. I don't reject that. But the features of late Christian art is the veneration. That's absolutely the claim that I've been making. Yes.
All
Yeah,
right,
it says very early on, though. Just
What
so we're
it
clear.
says that there were images early on
guys.
does not say that they were venerated. And this says that the ones that were venerated is like a feature of the later Christian art, the late Christian art.
All right.
All right, for me to comment, my comment is, yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. And like I was saying, that would be expected because what Rami has been doing here is he's been trying to push a narrative as if all the scholarship is just on his side. When, like I said earlier today, earlier tonight, that the scholarship is actually divided on these issues. You have multiple positions. You have the ones who say that this was a development. You have the position that says that early on, icon veneration was there and that it was a practice. Then you have kind of a more neutral position, which says images were there since the beginning or second century, like in the catacombs and the caves and stuff like that. But just we can't rule out the possibility that they could have venerated them. So it's like a more neutral position. And but yeah, I think you did a pretty good job there, Chicken, with just showing like all the scholars are not on Rami's side with this. There are different opinions.
Well, the thing she presented supported me, but okay, thank you.
Ty, you got the last word. There's supposed to be no responses if it's an open-ended question.
Yeah, well, she said early on, so that's I don't think it supported you. I think it actually supported us, but I mean, you can think that, whatever.
All right, we're done. So next up is Flash 84, and then final question to Ezru.
And it said late, if I recall. Late, then early.
All right, how's it going?
So
All right, I have a question / request from both parties. I'm going to stay fairly neutral in the question. Can either one of you provide your favorite scripture supporting your case for icon or image veneration in the church?
sure. I would go to I would use Psalms 5:7. If you read it, It says, I will bow down towards your holy temple." Now, the reason why that's important, like I said earlier, was because if you're familiar with Solomon's temple in the Old Testament, the temple was full of images, and I would make a case that the scriptures do teach a concept of iconodulia, because if they're prostrating before Solomon's temple and the same temple has images in it, that means the prostration would not only have been directed towards the temple, but also images. So that would be my case from scripture.
Okay. So, um, first of all, the temple had the Holy of Holies. That's literally the presence of God. Just like the cherubims were not venerated, God was present on the mercy seat. His presence was truly there. That's what it says in, the scriptures. If I recall, it's Deuteronomy. Now, my favorite scripture is going to be from Leviticus 26:1, and it says, "Ye shall make you no idols, nor graven images, neither rear you up a standing image, neither shall ye set up any image of stone in your land to proskenosis unto it, for I am the Lord your God." So this whole idea of like proskenosis being okay towards images is plainly refuted here. And Ty earlier said, well, proskenosis, it says proskenosis or latria, but that's exactly the point. It's banning both of them. Both proskenosis and latria towards images is banned, not once commanded. And that's, you can see this over and over in the scriptures.
Okay. Thank you both for your response.
Yep, we're gonna move on to Ezru, and then Blackout. If you're listening, we're gonna let Sergeant end off the night, since Pedro was there, and that was obviously going to be a question to Ty. We'll just replace Pedro with Sergeant. So Ezru, come on up, ask your question, and
Hello,
then
can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. So this question is directed towards Ramy. So you said earlier that incense burning is a practice that is strictly for God, correct?
Right.
So how do you reconcile with Daniel 2:46 when King Nebuchadnezzar prostrated before Daniel and offered up incense towards him? What would be your response to this verse?
Well, I would simply declare that I don't take my theology from a pagan Babylonian king. Maybe you do. Maybe like that's your example where you get your theology is to imitate pagans. In
I
fact,
just
I
asked
do
you a
believe that's what
question.
you do, but I will follow the Lord and I will keep the commandments of the Lord. I'm not going to follow some like pagan theology.
I just asked you a question. You don't need to manifest, but okay, that's
All
fine.
right, Ty, you get the
Yeah,
comment.
I like how Rami did not answer the question. It's okay though. Okay, anyways, yeah. This is why I was trying to point out the entire purposes of like idolatry. It's not necessarily always about the external act itself, but it also has to do with the internal disposition of the person's heart. So when they do the same, if they have an internal disposition to believe that this same creature that they're giving this to is a god, then clearly be idolatry. And by the way, we would agree with this. Like there are forms. There were examples of that actually in the early church, where with certain images they would be usually decorated in different forms. Or let's give the analogy like what you're let's say you're at a funeral, right? And you have a photo, you have a picture of like your dead relative or something like that, and you put flowers around it, right? Like that'd be a form of veneration. You just like, you decorating it or whatever. And yeah, that'd be perfectly fine. It's not really an issue with that, because you're not having the internal disposition to believe that this person's God. So yeah, see the issue.
All right, Rami, question was for you. You get the last word. Then we're going to move on to Sergeant to close out the night. If you want to answer.
Oh yeah, sorry. Ty mentioned how I did not answer the question. Now, the question was about Nebuchadnezzar, the pagan king of Babylon, the same one who tried to make everybody worship a statue of himself. That guy burned incense for Daniel. And he's saying, like, hey, therefore, I can burn incense for icons. It's okay. Well, what you're doing there is this exact thing. Thank you. Like, this is great to end the debate. I wanted to end on this note. You're taking a pagan Babylonian king, what he did, and you're building your theology around him. Meanwhile, I'm pointing you to the scriptures, the law of God, that which God commanded, and I'm telling you, no, you shouldn't do that. The burning of incense was very, very specific. And when they tried to offer incense in a way that was not prescribed by God, they were killed. So it was like a very grave sin to offer incense in the wrong way, and two of the priests died because of that when they offered incense with strange fire. They didn't use the proper type of fire. They didn't do it properly as they should. And so you're not doing it properly as you should. You're inspiring yourself after pagan theology, just like you did with this pagan king, and that you're using to try and justify your position. I think it's like the perfect conclusion for this debate. It's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the verse just doesn't say anywhere this is pagan around me, so that's like the problem here. It's just
All
not
right,
what it said.
Rami, you get the last word because it was supposed to be for you.
Yeah, so when they're worshiping the idol, it doesn't necessarily mention like the pagan practice of worshiping the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. It just describes the events and it goes through them. That doesn't mean the events were not pagan. Like that was definitely pagan. Similarly, Nebuchadnezzar was a pagan, and so we should not model our theology after him. It doesn't have to like explicitly say
Why wasn't
that
it rebuked?
practice that he did was pagan. It's obvious by virtue of him being the Babylonian king. Like you have Babylonian theology.
It wasn't rebuked, so that's the problem. If it were indeed pagan, why wasn't it rebuked? Usually God does that when something is idolatrous. It's rebuked nowhere.
All right, Rami, you get to answer that, and then Ty, don't say anything. We're going to move on to Sergeant.
So the Bible describes many events that are wrong and they are not rebuked. Just like that, in my mind, I'm gonna come up with a few. Lot sleeping with his daughters. Like they were alone, and it just mentions the events, and then it goes on. It doesn't like rebuke them openly. There's many instances where things that are wrong happen, and it's just part of the narrative, like of the story of the Bible. The Bible is not like they're making a moral claim about each of the things that are happening. The moral like framework is established in the law. That's why I keep referring you to the law. Like, if you read Daniel and you look at Nebuchadnezzar, a pagan king, and you try to model your theology after him, that's wrong. You're not doing proper hermeneutics. Your understanding of burning of incense should come from the law of God, not from some pagan king that would burn incense for, Daniel. And it doesn't need to be like explicitly rebuked. It mentions all kinds of things all the time that are wrong and incorrect.
So Daniel would have been a sin according to you. Why does the verse?
Dude, we're done.
No, Daniel would have not been in sin because he was imprisoned by this Babylonian king, and Daniel doesn't have a say in like what they're doing. He's present, and just like example, the Jehu, if I recall correctly, the one that was healed by the prophet Elisha, if I recall correctly, or Elijah. It was Elisha or Elijah, healed the general from Syria. And that general asked for permission to be part of a pagan ceremony where the king would like lean upon him in the house of their idolatrous gods, like in their pagan temples. That general would have to perform a pagan like ceremony with the king where it would involve bowing down to idols, and Jeremiah gave him permission and he was not rebuked. that's like a very similar case where even if it's like wrong, the person is like forced into it, and then Elijah allows it or Daniel allows it, and it's not like held against them. It's not rebuked. So your arguments here are like basically just inspiring yourselves from pagan theology, which is funny. That's what the
All right,
scholars
we
that you did.
can just leave it
Yeah,
at that.
we can stop there. That's good.
So, all right, Sergeant, you finally get to ask your question. So make it a good one. Try to make it a better one than Soma earlier. He's tough to beat. That was a pretty good question earlier.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty good segue into the last point or the last question that was just made. I had in the religion chat if anybody wanted to glance at it because I know this chat's been going a lot. But yeah, just in reference to, like, Revelation 22:8 or 8:9, when we all know that he worshipped, or the guy went down and worshipped or was trying to worship the angel, and then he was rebuked here, and said, "Hey, I'm thy fellow servant," or whatever. So my question is, in light of that, do you think that you or Mary, let's say, because a lot of images are of Mary, like we see EK blasting him over and over, Ty, how does that settle with you when images and pictures are, almost, it's almost like, even blasphemous, or just a lot. It's overly, a lot of pictures are put of Mary by somebody, let's say, like EK and maybe other people. It just seems to be like his form of worship. How would you feel if people were blasting your pictures in your veneration of you? And how do you think maybe somebody like Mary would feel that would maybe take the focus off of her? I'm just kind of curious, what is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, okay. Well, you said a lot there, so I'll respond to first what you said about that verse with the scripture and Revelation, like that passage. It's actually interesting that you brought it up because the reason why he was rebuked by the angel when he tried to bow down to him, actually, in a context which would prove our point. At first, he actually thought that that was Jesus. He thought that was Jesus at first. So when he did it, right, I would say in a context, because he had the internal disposition to do it to God, in that context, that's why it was wrong and the angel rebuked him for it. Um, Now, when it comes to Mary and the saints, like in church and liturgy, all those things, again, this is just going to go back to the whole issue. It's You have to be able to distinguish between what is honor, right? Prostration can be honor and not necessarily be worship, and what is the worship that is given to God only. Um, Obviously, in your theology, right? Since you don't make these distinctions, of course, it's not going to make sense and it's going to be very confusing. But for example, in certain Asian cultures, even today, it's actually very common for them to prostrate before their leaders or their elders, even before family members. And I mean, uh, you as like an American, right? Americanized Christianity, you might think that that's weird in an Asian culture, but bowing to show respect is actually very common over there in Asia. And I wouldn't say this what we're doing is idolatry at all, because that's the conflation here. You think that prostrating is worship, and I'm telling you, no, it necessarily isn't.
Okay.
All right, Rami.
So I
Get
would
to comment.
say that honor people is good, and we are made in the image of God, and you should honor your brothers and sisters. You should, like, that's who you should honor. Absolutely. And that is a ancient Eastern practice of paying honor to people by bowing down, and that's like a representation of social status. It is not in the context of religiously honoring the person. First of all, that's a big symmetry breaker. Second of all, it's not because you can honor your brothers and sisters or honor people that are made in God's image that you can now honor images. Like the first doesn't establish the second, and we call that a pivot. So when they say, hey, look, there's honoring of people, therefore I can honor images, that doesn't follow. It's a pivot, and it's a fallacious argument.
All right, Ty, question was for you. You get the last word, and then we're going to wrap up this whole debate.
All right. Yeah, just to respond to Rami, what he said. No, I don't think it's a pivot at all because the entire point of the theology, which I know Rami, he doesn't quite understand it. The entire purpose is that when we're doing this honoring, the honor is not passing to the wood or the paint, but rather it's passing to the person that is represented in the image. I believe John of Damascus actually gets like a good analogy for this. I know he's later, but his analogy was kind of like, let's say you're in a church, somebody is standing behind like a glass window, right? You're standing behind a glass window, this person, and then you go up to kiss a glass window to try to honor this person, right? You wouldn't say you were honoring the glass and paint, but rather you were honoring the person which was behind it. And that's the whole basis for this type and prototype distinction. The honor isn't going to the actual materials of wood and paint, but who was represented. So no, I don't think it's a pivot at all. I don't see the basis for Rami to have all of these inconsistencies and say, oh, it's okay to honor people in secular contexts, but in church, no, that's not okay. We can't do this with the saints in heaven. I just don't see the reason to have these inconsistencies.
Yeah, the cultic use of images is not the same thing as like honoring people for their social status. It most definitely is a pivot. And we can talk about that more. Like let's drop in there and like address this specific point if you want. I also want to do the challenge on the church fathers. If any of you guys will pick it up.
Okay, well there was a claim in there, so I'm gonna allow Ty to respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, no, I wouldn't say it's different at all because the same theology that's applying that the way this can apply in secular context can apply in religious context. And keep in mind the whole crux of this, right? I think the fact that Rami is giving all these inconsistent arguments, I think it shows that the root of this all is it's a Christological error, which was the main reason why iconography is so important because that maintains an Orthodox Christology, and that's why we would accuse him of being Dotatist.
Yeah, so the person is not a type that you're honoring with the expectation that honor would pass on to the prototype. That is not your theology. That does not establish your theology. So, like I said, it is a pivot and it is fallacious.
All right, Ty, last word again. Rami, no offense, I'm going to mute you just to make sure you don't do that again because we're trying to wrap this up.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty apparent. Rami doesn't really understand the theology, right? He just, he kind of rambling, if I'm being honest. But the theology is there. The person who's being represented is who the honor is being passed on to. He didn't really demonstrate what was the issue with this. He just kept saying, that was basically the response. So.
All right, so that's it for our debate tonight. Thank you to Rami and to Ty for taking time to study out this topic and have this debate for all of us tonight. I also want to thank all the questioners for coming up and making the conversation even more interesting. That said, and also thank you for entrusting me with hosting the debate on a 2-minute notice. With that said, I think there's probably some sort of post-debate conversation that's going to be going on in one of the rooms below. So if any of you are interested, we can go listen to that. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks.